Welcome to the MasterMind Library. They call me Ferdinand, the bringer of balance, leader of many disciplines, and your host of the MasterMind Library, the home of the MasterMind Book Club. So today we are in episode 81. Thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and change around a couple of things. Matter of fact, let me change these lights too. I got them turned in different locations. We were doing some lessons today. Y'all give me 1 second. And then we will move forward. All right, I'm back with a little more light. All right, so we're in episode 91 today, and we are in chapter 18 in the NeverEnding Story. Atreyu and Bastion have they got a new rapport for each other, right? Some layers are unfolding. Atreyu even suggested he could help Bastion get back home. Bastion doesn't seem as interested to go back home, right? So we're about to see where that goes today in the Acarus. All right, so let's go ahead and move to that location in the book. All right, chapter 18. Let's make everything a little bigger for everybody. And then we will move forward. All right. Rain was coming down in buckets. The black, wet clouds hung so low they seemed almost to graze the heads of the riders. Then big, sticky snowflakes began to fall, and in the end it was snowing and raining in one. The wind was so strong that even the horses had to brace themselves against it. The riders' cloaks were soaked through and flapped heavily against the backs of the beasts. For the last 3 days they had been riding over a desolate high plateau. The weather had been getting steadily worse, and the ground was a mixture of mud and sharp stones that made for hard going. Here and there, the monotony of the landscape was broken by clumps of bushes or of stunted wind-bowed trees. Bastion, who rode in the lead on his mule, Yika, was fairly well off with his glittering silver mantle, which, though light and thin, proved to be remarkably warm and shed water like a duck. The low-slung body of Hycrion, the strong, almost vanished in his thick blue woolen coat. The delicate-built Heisbald had pulled his great loden hood over his red hair, and Hydorn's gray canvas cloak clung to his gaunt frame. Yet in their rather crude way, the three knights were of good cheer. They hadn't expected their adventure with Sir Bastion to be a Sunday stroll. Now and then, with more spirit than art, they sang into the storm, sometimes singly and sometimes in chorus. Their favorite song seemed to be one that began with the words, "When that I was a little tiny boy, with hey, ho, the wind and the rain." As they explained, this had been sung by a human who had visited Fantasia long years before, name of Shakespeare, or something of the sort. The only one in the group who didn't seem to mind the cold and the rain was Atreyu. On Falcor's back, he rode high above the clouds, flying far ahead to reconnoiter and rejoining the company from time to time to report on what he had seen. They all, even the luck dragon, believed they were looking for the road that would take Bastion back to his world. Bastion thought so too. He himself didn't realize that he had agreed to Atreyu's suggestion only to oblige his friend, and that wasn't what he really wanted. But the geography of Fantasia is determined by wishes, which may or may not be conscious. And since it was Bastion who led the way, They were actually going deeper and deeper into Fantasia, heading for the ivory tower at its very center. What the consequences for him would be, he wouldn't learn until much later. For the present, neither he, sincere, hold that book. For the present, neither he nor his companions had any idea where they were going. Bastian's thoughts were busy with a different problem. On the second day of their journey, in the forest surrounding the Lake of Tears, he had seen unmistakable traces of the dragon Smurge. Some of the trees had been turned to stone, no doubt by contact with the monster's icy cold fire, and the prints of the giant grasshopper feet were clearly discernible. Atreyu, who was skilled in woodcraft, had seen other tracks as well, those of Hero Heinrich's horse, which meant that Hero Heinrich was close on the dragon's heels. That doesn't really thrill me, said Falkor, rolling his ruby red eyes. Monster or not, this Smurge is a relative of mine, a distant one, to be sure, but a relative all the same. He was only half in jest. They had not followed Hero Heinrich's track, but had taken a different direction, since their supposed aim was to find Bastian's way home. And now Bastian was asking himself, had it really been such a good idea to invent a dragon for Hero Heinrich? True, Heinrich had needed a chance to show his mettle, but was it certain that he would win? What if Smurge killed him? And what about Princess Oglamar? Yes, of course, she had been haughty, but was that a reason for getting her into such a fix? And on top of all that, how was he to know what further damage Smurge might do in Fantasia? Without stopping to think, Bastian had created an unpredictable menace. It would be there long after he was gone, and quite possibly kill or maim any number of innocents. As he knew, Moonchild drew no distinction between good and evil, beautiful and ugly. To her mind, all the creatures in Fantasia were equally important and worthy of consideration. But had he, Bastian, the right to take the same attitude? And above all, did he wish to? No, Bastian said to himself. He had no wish to go down in history of Fantasia as a creator of monsters and horrors. How much finer would it be to become famous for his unselfish goodness? To be a shining model for all, to be revered as the good human or the great benefactor. Yes, that was what he wanted. The country had become mountainous, and Atreyu, returning from a reconnaissance flight, reported that a few miles ahead he had sighted a glen which seemed to offer shelter from the wind. In fact, if his eyes had not deceived him, there were several caves round about where they could take refuge from the rain and snow. It was already late afternoon, high time to find suitable quarters for the night. So all the others were delighted at Atreyu's news and spurred their mounts on. They were making their way through a valley, possibly a dried out riverbed, enclosed in mountains which grew higher as the travelers advanced. Some 2 hours later, they reached the glen, and true enough, there were several caves in the surrounding cliffs. They chose the largest and made themselves as comfortable as they could. The three knights gathered brushwood and branches that had been blown down by the storm, and soon they had a splendid fire going in the cave. The wet cloaks were spread out to dry, the beasts were brought in and unsaddled, and even Falkor, who ordinarily preferred to spend the night in the open, curled up at the back of the cave. All in all, it wasn't such a bad place to be in. While Hydorn, the Enduring, tried to roast a big chunk of meat over the fire, and the others watched him eagerly, Atreyu turned to Bastian and said, "Tell us some more about Krista." About what? Bastian asked. Your friend, Krista, The little girl you told your stories to. I don't know any little girl by that name, said Bastian. And what makes you think I told her stories? Once again, Atreyu had that thoughtful look. Back in your world, he said slowly, you used to tell her lots of stories, some to her and some to yourself. How do you know that, Atreyu? You said so yourself in Amarganth. And you also said that people made fun of you for it. Bastian started into the fire. That's true, he muttered. I did say that, but I don't know why. I can't remember. It all seemed very strange. Atreyu exchanged glances with Falcor and nodded gravely as though something one of them had said had now been proved true. But he said nothing more. Evidently, he didn't wish to discuss such matters in front of the three knights. The meat's done, Hydorn announced. He cut off a chunk for each one, and they all began to eat. Done was a gross exaggeration. The meat was charred on the outside and raw on the inside. But under the circumstances, there was no point in being picky and choosy. For a while, they were all busy chewing. Then Atreyu said to Bastian, Tell us how you came to Fantasia. You know all about it, said Bastian. It was you who brought me to the childlike empress. I mean before that, said Atreyu. In your world, where did you live and how did it all happen? Then Bastian told how he had stolen the book from Mr. Coriander, how he had carried it off to the schoolhouse attic and began to read. When he came to Atreyu's great quest, Atreyu mentioned him to stop. He didn't seem interested in what the book said about him. What interested him in the extreme was the how and why of Bastian's visit to Mr. Coriander and of his flight to the attic of the schoolhouse. Bastian racked his brains, but about those things he could remember nothing more. He had forgotten everything connected with the fact that he had once been fat and weak and cowardly. His memory had been broken into bits, and the bits seemed as vague and far away as if they had concerned an entirely different person. Atreyu asked for other memories, and Bastian spoke about the days when his mother was still alive, about his father and his home, about school and the town he lived in, as much as he remembered. The three knights had fallen asleep, and Bastian was still talking. It surprised him that Atreyu should take such interest in the most everyday happenings. Maybe it was because of the way Atreyu listened that these everyday things look on a new interest for Bastian, as though they contained a secret magic that he had never noticed before. At last he ran out of memories. It was late in the night. The fire had died down. The three knights were snoring softly. Atreyu sat there with his inscrutable look, as though deep in thought. Bastian stretched out, wrapped himself in his silver mantle, and had almost fallen asleep when Atreyu said softly, It's because of Orin. Bastian propped his head on his hands and looked sleepily at his friend. What do you mean by that? The gem, said Atreyu, as though talking to himself, doesn't work the same with humans as with us. What makes you think that? The amulet gives you great power. It makes all your wishes come true. But at the same time, it takes something away. Your memory of your world. Bastian thought it over. He didn't feel as if anything had been taken away from him. Grogorman told me to find out what I really wanted. And the inscription on Aurin says the same thing. But for that, I have to go from one wish to the next without ever skipping any. That's why I need the gem. Yes, said Atreyu. It gives you the means, but it takes away your purpose. Oh well, said Bastian, undismayed. Moonchild must have known what she was doing when she gave me the amulet. You worry too much, Atreyu. I'm sure Aurin isn't a trap. No, said Atreyu. I don't think so either. And after a while, he added, Anyway, it's good we're looking for the way back to your world. We are, aren't we? Oh, yes, said Bastion, already half asleep. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by a strange sound. He had no idea what it was. The fire had gone out, and he was lying in total darkness. Then he felt Atreyu's hand on his shoulder and heard him whisper, What's that? I don't know, Bastion whispered back. They crept to the mouth of the cave and listened. A great many creatures seemed to be trying to fight back their sobs. There was nothing human about it, and it didn't sound like animals in pain. Starting as a whisper, it swelled to a sigh, then ebbed and rose. Never had Bastion heard anything so mournful. If at least we could see something, Atreyu whispered. Wait, said Bastion. I've got all Sahir. He took the glittering stone from his pocket and held it high. It gave hardly more light than a candle, but in its faint glow, the friends saw enough to make their skin crawl with horror. The whole glen was alive with hideous, foot-long worms, who looked as if they had been wrapped in soiled rags. Slimy little limbs protruded from the folds in their skin. At one end, two lidless eyes peered out from under the rags, and from every eye flowed tears, thousands of tears. The whole glen was wet with them. The moment the light from Al Sahir hit them, the creatures froze, and the friends were able to see what they had been doing. At the center of the glen stood a tower of the finest silver filigree, more beautiful and more valuable than any building Bastion had seen in Amargon. Some of the worm-like creatures had evidently been climbing about on the tower, joining its innumerable parts, but at present they all stood motionless, staring at the light of Al Sahir. A ghoulish whisper passed over the glen. Alas! Alas! What light has fallen on our ugliness, whose eye has seen us. Cruel intruder, whoever you may be, have mercy. Take that light away. Bastion stood up. I am Bastion Balthasar Bucks. Who are you? We are the Acaris. We are the unhappiest beings in all Fantasia. Bastion said nothing and looked in dismay at Atreyu. Then, he said, it's you who created Amargon, the most beautiful city in Fantasia. Yes, the creatures cried. But take that light away, and don't look at us. Have mercy. And with your weeping, you made Maru, the lake of tears. Master, they groaned, it's true, but we'll die of shame and horror if you make us stand in this light. Why must you add to our torment? We've never done anything to you. Bastion put Al Sahir back in his pocket, and again the night was as black as pitch. Thank you, cried the mournful voices. Thank you for your merciful kindness. I want to talk with you, said Bastion. I want to help you. He was almost sick with disgust, but he felt very sorry for the poor things. It was clear to him that they were the creatures he had mentioned in his story about the origin of Amargon. But here again, he couldn't be sure whether they had always been there or whether they owed their existence to him. In the latter case, he was responsible for their misery. But either way, he was determined to help them. Oh, the plaintive voices whispered. No one can help us. I can, said Bastion. I have Aurin. At that time, they all seemed to stop weeping at once. Where have you come from? Bastion asked. A chorus of many voices whispered. We live in the lightless depths of the earth to hide our ugliness from the sun, and there we weep all day and all night. Our tears wash the indestructible silver out of the bedrock, and from it we spin the filigree you have seen. On the darkest nights we mount to the surface, and these caves are our coming out places. Up here we join together the sections we've made down below. We've come tonight because it was dark enough for us to work without seeing one another. We work to make amends to the world for our ugliness, and that comforts us a little. But you're not to blame for your ugliness, said Bastion. Oh, there are different ways of being to blame, the Acarist replied. And what you do, in what you think, we're to blame for just living. How can I help you? Bastion asked. He felt so sorry for them that he could hardly hold back his own tears. All great benefactor, the Acarist cried. You've got Aurin. With Aurin, you can save us. We have only one thing to ask of you. Give us different bodies. Don't worry, said Bastion. I will. Here's my wish, that you shall fall asleep. Then when you wake up, you shall crawl out of your skin and turn into bright-colored butterflies. That you shall be light-hearted and happy, and that, beginning tomorrow, you shall no longer be the Acarists, the everlasting weepers, but the Shalmoofs, the everlasting laughers. Bastion awaited their answer, but no sound came from the darkness. They've fallen asleep, Atreyu whispered. The two friends went back into their cave. Icebald, Hydorn, and Hycreon were still snoring gently. They had slept through the whole incident. Bastion lay down. He was extremely pleased with himself. Soon all Fantasia would learn of the good deed he had done. It had really been unselfish, since no one could claim that he had wished anything for himself. There would be nothing to mar the glory of his goodness. What do you think, Atreyu? He whispered. Atreyu was silent for a moment. Then he replied, I only wonder what it may have cost you. Not until somewhat later, after Atreyu had fallen asleep, did it dawn on Bastion that his friend had been referring to his self-abnegation, but to his loss of memory. But he gave the matter no further thought and fell asleep in joyful anticipation of the morrow. The next morning the three knights woke him up with their cries of amazement. Would you look at that? My word, even my old mare is giggling. They were standing in the mouth of the cave. Atreyu was with them, but Atreyu wasn't laughing. Bastion got up and went out. The whole glen was crawling and flitting and tumbling with the most comical little creatures he had ever seen. They all had bright colored butterfly wings on their backs and were wearing the weirdest outfits. Some checkered, some striped, some ringed, some dotted. All their clothes looked either too loose or too tight, too big or too small, and they were pieced together every which way. Nothing was right, and there were patches all over, even on the wings. No two of these creatures were alike. They had faces like clowns, splotched with every imaginable color, little round red noses or absurdly long ones, and enormous rubbery mouths. Some wore top hats, others peaked caps. Some had only 3 brick red tufts of hair, and some had shiny bald heads. Most were sitting or hopping about on the delicate filigree tower, or dangling from it, doing gymnastics, and in general doing their best to wreak it. Bastion ran out to them. Hey, you guys, he shouted. Cut that out! You can't do that! The creature stopped and looked down at him. One at the very top of the tower asked, What did he say? And one from further down replied, The whatchamacallum says we can't do this? Why does he say we can't do it? Asked a third. Because you just can't, Bastion screamed. You can't just smash everything up. The whatchamacallum says we can't smash everything up, the first butterfly clown informed the others. We can too, said another, tearing a big chunk out of the tower. Hopping about like a lunatic, the first called down to Bastion. We can too. The tower swayed and creaked alarmingly. Hey, what are you doing? Bastion shouted. He was angry and he was frightened, but at the same time, he had all he could do to keep from laughing. The first butterfly clown turned to his companions. The whatchamacallin wants to know what we're doing. What are we doing? Asked another. We're having fun, said a third. But the tower will collapse if you don't stop, Bastion screamed. The whatchamacallin, the first clown informed the others, says the tower will collapse if we don't stop. So what? Said another. And the first called down, So what? Bastion was speechless, and before he could find a suitable answer, all the butterfly clowns on the tower began to do a sort of aerial round dance. But instead of holding hands, they grabbed one another by the legs or collars, while some simply whirled head over heels through the air, and all bellowed and laughed. The act that the winged creatures were putting on was so light-hearted and comical that Bastion gave up trying to hold back his laughter. But you can't do that, he called to them. The Acarus made it, and it's beautiful. The first butterfly clown turned back to the others. The whatchamacallum says we can't do it. We can do anything that's not forbidden, cried another, turning somersaults in the air. And who's going to forbid us? We're the Schlamoofs. Who's going to forbid us anything? All cried in chorus. We're the Schlamoofs. I am, cried Bastion. The whatchamacallum, the first clown explained to the others, says I. You, said the others. How can you forbid us anything? No, said the first. Not I. The whatchamacallum says he. Why does the whatchamacallum says he? The others wanted to know. And who is he saying he to in the first place? Who are you saying he to? The first butterfly clown called down to Bastion. I didn't say he, Bastion screamed, half fuming, half laughing. I said I forbid you to wreck this tower. He forbids us, said the first clown to the others, to wreck this tower. Who does? Inquired one who had just turned up from the far end of the glen. The whatchamacallum, the others replied. I don't know any whatchamacallum, said the newcomer. Who is he anyway? The first rang out. Hey, whatchamacallum, who are you anyway? I'm not a whatchamacallum, said Bastion. I'm not a whatchamacallum, said Bastion, who by then was moderately angry. I'm Bastion Balthasar Bucks, and I turned you into Schlamoofs, so you wouldn't have to cry and moan the whole time. Last night, you were still miserable, Acarus. It wouldn't hurt us to show your benefactor some respect. The Schlamoofs all stopped hopping and dancing at once and stood gaping at Bastion. A breathless silence fell. What did the whatchamacallum say? Whispered a butterfly clown at the edge of the crowd. But his next door neighbor cracked him on the head so hard that his hat slid down over his eyes and ears, and all the others went, Psst. Would you be so kind to repeat all that very slowly and distinctly? The first butterfly clown requested. I am your benefactor, cried Bastion. This threw the Schlamoofs into an incredible state of agitation. One passed the word on to the next, and in the end, the innumerable creatures, who up until then had been scattered all over the glen, gathered into a knot around Bastion, shouting in one another's ears. Did you hear that? He's our Bimafixer. His name is Nastaban Baltabux. No, he's Buckshin Bananectar. Rubbish! It's Saratit Buxabim. No, it's Baldrian, Hicks, Schlux, Babel, Tran, Billy Scooter, Nix, Flax, Tricks. Besides themselves with enthusiasm, they shook hands all around, tipped their hats to one another, and raised great clouds of dust by slapping one another on the belly or back. "We're so lucky," they cried. "Three cheers for Buxa Factor Zanzibar Bastilbin." Screaming and laughing, the whole great swarm shot upward and whirled away. The hubbub died down in the distance. Bastian stood there hardly knowing what his right name was. By that time, he wasn't so sure he had really done a good deed. And that concludes chapter 18. On our next episode, we'll have chapter 19, The Traveling Companions. So Bastian is making all of his wishes come true, and this time he took one monster and he created another monster. And at the same time, we have Atreyu with his wisdom helping Bastian understand that there's a price for his wishes. So in our next episode, we'll be coming back with chapter 19 and chapter 92. We look forward to seeing all of y'all. All right, y'all take care, be blessed, and expose your gift.